The 2019 election was all about Brexit. Get Brexit done was a simple slogan which saw Boris Johnson win a big majority. But fast forward to 2024 and Brexit is barely mentioned. The party of Brexit have very little to say on their flagship project. The greatest benefit of Brexit was supposed to be a free trade deal with the United States, but the US are just not interested. Popular opinion has turned against Brexit, with 58% viewing it as a mistake and only 31% agreeing it was the right choice. But Labour have no ambition to make any real changes. Even the Liberal Democrats, committed in theory to rejoining, in practice want to focus on raw sewage in rivers as a main election strategy. What happened to Brexit? Is everyone just exhausted by the topic, or is it the elephant in the room which won't go away? To many, Brexit was just a simple rejection of the European Union. Once you've left, that's it. But one ideological approach to Brexit was that Brexit was an opportunity to turn the UK into a low-tax, low-regulation, free trade nirvana, a kind of Singapore on Thames. Patrick Minford, the prominent leader of Economists for Brexit, argued that after Brexit we should not negotiate with the European Union, but just unilaterally pursue free trade deals with the rest of the world. He argued we may lose trade with Europe, but we would gain with trade with Asia, Africa and America. And this free trade nirvana would revitalise the UK economy. But there are a number of problems with this approach. Firstly, free trade has fallen out of fashion. The US politics is all about protectionism. Trump may have started a trade war with China, but Biden has increased it, and recently he introduced £400 billion of protectionist green energy subsidies, which has made life difficult for the UK and EU manufacturers. Pre-Brexit, the so-called Washington Consensus was all about free trade and free market. But the world view has changed. In Washington now, free trade is almost a dirty word, and this is a problem for the Singapore on Thames style Brexit. Their worldview is outdated. The world is retreating into regional trading blocs. After the 2022 Ukraine war, European solidarity appears more desirable than relying on cheap Chinese and Russian imports. The other part of a free market Brexit was to slash taxes and regulations, and this is exactly what the Brexiteer Liz Truss did in September 2022. Lower corporation tax, lower tax for high earners. It was a $190 billion fiscal bonanza, and briefly newspapers were ecstatic. With the true believers further, she hoped it would lead to a surge in investment, higher growth, and make Brexit Britain the envy of the world. Unfortunately, it was badly timed and the pound slumped, mortgage yields soared, and she was forced to resign, outlived by a lettuce, and this particular Brexit dream in shatters. The other aspect of Brexit is that it isn't even done. Even in 2024, 8 years after the vote, new regulations and new import duties are still coming into effect. Food importers report stories of delays at the border and expensive custom checks. It's likely to push up the price of food even more, and farmers aren't happy either. A report by Nuffield showed how Brexit has weakened the UK's ability to respond to medicine shortages. A big question for the average voter on the street who's not particularly politically engaged is what are the benefits of Brexit? Promises of an extra £300 million a week for the NHS seem outdated given the rapid rise in waiting lists and general dissatisfaction with the state of the service. Brexit did lead to a fall in EU migration, which was one of the motivations for the vote in 2016. But ironically, it led to an even bigger rise in non-EU migration. Last year, net migration was more than double pre-Brexit levels. On free trade, the UK has signed free trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, and this is estimated to boost GDP by 0.08% by 2035, but not really something to fight an election on. Since 2016 and 2021 in particular, UK economic performance has been very weak. Real GDP per capita is still below pre-COVID levels. Now, the main reason has been low productivity growth, which predated Brexit, and the global cost-push inflation shock. But Brexit might have itself contributed to higher inflation. The UK has had higher inflation than many other countries. Hard to see how it's helped. Studies suggest that Brexit will reduce GDP by around 4 to 5% by 2035. That means the average person will lose around £2,300 compared to if we'd stayed in the EU. And it also leads to a lot of tax revenue the UK can't really absorb given the ongoing austerity in many government departments. Now, given the many economic costs of Brexit, higher tariffs, lower investment, lower growth, it is unsurprising public opinion has turned against Brexit. Though it isn't so much people changing their mind as demographic factors. Older voters were much more likely to support Brexit, and younger voters much more likely to be favourable to the EU. So as time passes, you would expect support for rejoining only to grow. So given this popular support and economic costs of Brexit, why are not parties doing more to explicitly promote policies about rejoining the EU? Well, there are 5 main reasons. Firstly, Brexit was very divisive and time-consuming. It caused years of exhausting debate about what the new arrangement should be. To reopen negotiations would suck a lot of energy out of any future government. What we learned from the May Parliament is that there's no easy trade-off. Whatever you negotiate, you're going to upset some people. Plus, exhausted by Brexit process, the EU is unlikely to be in a mood to be generous. Pre-Brexit, the UK had lots of special deals, special opt-outs and rebates, and this is unlikely to be on the table. Secondly, Europe has never been particularly a huge issue of significance. It was only around the referendum where it became the number one issue. But today, people are more concerned about things such as cost of living, state of public services, even crime and housing. People may regret Brexit, but it doesn't mean that rejoining is their highest priority. Thirdly, the electoral system of first past the post does lend itself to Labour's strategy of appealing to former Brexit voters. In 2019, Labour piled up votes in Remain areas, but lost parliamentary seats in Leave areas. Labour's strategy has been to maximise parliamentary seats rather than vote share. For example, in the recent Blackpool by-election, Labour achieved a near-record 26% swing in a strongly pro-Brexit constituency. If Labour were more in favour of rejoining, they may not see that kind of swing in Brexit areas. Fourthly, although Brexit has imposed economic costs on the economy, it would be a mistake to think that rejoining the EU would be a panacea for the UK's problems. The problems of the UK economy do predate Brexit. Low productivity growth, low economic growth, really since the great financial crisis around 2009. So rejoining the single market would have certain advantages. Some importing and exporting firms would particularly benefit, but it wouldn't make life suddenly easy for the UK economy. Fifthly, constitutional change is not like changing a tax rate. If you increase income tax, you can easily cut it the next year. But rejoining something like the single market would be very time consuming and difficult, and constitutional change should really something be done, maybe once a generation, once every 10, 20 years at the very minimum. So there is a logic for waiting for at least one parliament before gradually moving towards a closer integration. So it's definitely interesting to see how things can so quickly change. For a few years, Brexit dominated the political landscape, and it meant that perhaps more important issues like the UK's housing crisis, a shortage of skilled labour, public finances, got somewhat neglected. Now, it's possible Brexit contributed to some of these issues, such as deterioration in public finances. A few years later, and Brexit has definitely faded from view. And if trends of deglobalisation, a retreating into regional trading blocs continues, European Union may be increasingly important to the UK. But perhaps the best approach is not a divisive, head-first confrontation which reopens all Brexit wounds, but a more gradual approach. 2029, perhaps consider rejoining the customs union. 2034, consider the single market. 10 years later, and much of the bitterness of the Brexit debate may have faded from view, and perhaps there's an even bigger majority in favour of rejoining. Now, why has the economy struggled in the past 14 years? Brexit is part of the equation, but it's much more to it than that. This video looks at all the reasons for why the UK economy has struggled in recent years.